Yet it is in those moments of deep sorrow that etiquette performs our most vital and real service. It is the time-worn servitor etiquette who draws the shades, who muffles the bell, who keeps the house quiet, who hushes voices and footsteps and sudden noises, who stands between well-meaning and importunate outsiders and the retirement of the bereaved, who decrees that the last rite shall be performed smoothly and with beauty and gravity, so that the poignancy of grief may, in so far as possible, be assuaged.
Oh, Emily Post, it's been almost a century since you wrote those words. Would you mind if we spent some time investigating on just how far your etiquette is still current today?
I would be delighted.
For example, what should happen when a sick person dies?
As soon as death occurs, the trained nurse usually, draws the blinds in the sick room and tells a servant to draw the blinds in all of the house. If they are not already present, the first act of someone at the bedside is to telephone or telegraph the immediate members of the family, the clergyman, and the sexton of the church to which the family belongs. The sexton is nearly every Protestant church is also the undertaker. If he is not, then an outside funeral director is sent for.
I don't think we have servants these days, nor are there blinds necessarily on all our windows. And so I think this custom has gone away. You know, these days we would probably text the minister instead of telegraphing. That's just a little bit old-fashioned. And by the way, if you do, be sure to say who's sending the message and who the person is who died. It's kind of important. And also where. I just would appreciate that. Just a side note. There's nothing worse than getting a text saying, my father died, and a number that I don't know. So just remember that one. But I think we go overboard on texting and phoning. In fact, I remember when I was working as a chaplain in the East Jefferson General Hospital in Louisiana, when a patient died, there were some families who would immediately all leave the room and start texting where there was a good signal. It was really bizarre. I was the only one left in the room with the person who just died.
Persons under the shock of genuine affliction are not only upset mentally, but are all unbalanced physically. No matter how calm and controlled they seemingly may be, no one can under such circumstances be normal. Their disturbed circulation makes them cold. Their distress makes them unsnug and sleepless. No one should ever be forced upon those in grief, and all over-emotional people, no matter how near or dear, should be barred absolutely. It sounds paradoxical to say that those who in sorrow should be protected from all contact, and yet that they must be constantly asked about arrangements and given little time to remain utterly undisturbed. They must think of people they want to send for. They must decide the details of the funeral, when they would like it held, and whether in church or at the house, whether they want special music or flowers ordered, and where the interment will be done.
Oh, Mrs. Post, that sounds awful. In these days, if someone posts on Facebook that grandma died, every friend of friend will feel obligated to call immediately the granddaughter's or grandson's cell phone, and no matter what the hour, or at least send a text. How can they get a moment of peace?
A close friend or male member of the family should be, if not at the door, as near the front hall as possible, to see the countless people with whom details have to be arranged, to admit to a member of the family anyone they may want to see, and to give news to or take messages from others. As people come to the house to inquire and offer their services, he gives them commissions the occasion requires. The first friend who hurries to the house in answer to the telephone message which announced the death is asked to break the news to an invalid connection of the family, or he may be sent to the florist to order the bell hung, or to the station to meet a child arriving from school.
The idea of giving your cell phone to a friend who then screens the calls and texts seems like a good idea. Do you think that we should reach out to our most level-headed friend, whether they are male or female, incidentally, to come and help us when a close relative dies? Who would you trust with this task? And I like the idea of anyone who comes to pay their respects may be commissioned to go buy flowers or take the news to someone in a nursing home, or indeed to go get pizza. They're there to help. Put them to use. I was interested to hear that the church sexton is supposed to be called. What else did he or she used to do?
The sexton sends the notice to the daily newspaper announcing the death and the time and place of the funeral.
I suppose funeral directors tend to do that these days. When my father died, we composed our own obituary for him, and we sent it to the local paper. And as I remember, we had to pay for that to get that published.
With the exception of the telephone message or telegrams to relatives and very intimate friends, no other notices are sent out.
Did you know that in many states one doesn't actually need a funeral director, but in New Jersey a licensed funeral director is required to sign the death certificate? So a funeral director will be involved.
As a rule, the funeral director hangs crepe streamers on the doorbell, white ones for a child or black for an older person. This signifies to the passerby that it is a house of mourning, so that the bell will not be rung unnecessarily nor long.
Oh my, I don't think I even have a doorbell. But how do you tell telemarketers to go away? It sounds like funeral directors can make a death as fancy as a royal wedding.
He will, if not checked, bring the most ornate and expensive casket to his establishment. He will perform every rite that his professional ingenuity for expenditure can devise. Someone, therefore, who has the family's interest at heart should go personally to the establishment of the undertaker and go carefully into the specifications of all other details, so that everything necessary may be arranged for, and so that unnecessary items are omitted.
So there's a real job for a friend to help out here, take care of details if they haven't been decided in advance. I know you have lots of advice in your book on funerals, and those who saw, for example, Princess Di's funeral on TV would have seen an entirely appropriate Emily Post-style funeral. But what about mourning?
A generation or two ago, the regulations for mourning called for definite periods according to the relationship of the mourner. One's real feeling had nothing to do with it. The tendency today is toward sincerity. People do not put on black for aunts, uncles, and cousins unless there is a deep tie of affection as well as blood. Many persons today do not believe in going into mourning at all. There are some who believe, as do the races of the East, that great love should be expressed in rejoicing in the rebirth of a beloved spirit instead of selfishly mourning their own earthly loss. If you see acquaintances of yours in deep mourning, do you not go up to them and babble trivial topics or ask them to dance or dinner? A widow who follows the old-fashioned convention wears deep mourning with crepe veil 2 years, black the 3rd year, and second mourning the 4th.
That's interesting, and it does sound a little old-fashioned. But if that's what gives her comfort, we should understand and be sympathetic.
However, there is nothing more utterly captivating than a sweet young face under the widow's veil. It is not to be wondered at that her own loneliness and need of sympathy combined with all of the appealing to sympathy in a man, often results in the healing of her heart. A young widow should, however, never remain in mourning for her first husband after she has decided she can be consoled by a second.
Emily Post, you didn't just say that.
I did, and it's perfectly good etiquette.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for playing the part of Emily Post and bringing a bit of 1922 into our sanctuary today. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. So Emily Post tells us that etiquette gets us through the emotions that follow a death. Indeed, when someone dies, it seems like there are a million decisions that must be made right this minute. But there aren't a million. There are about a dozen. And they don't all have to be decided instantly and by you alone. The ritual of death is designed to spread out the decisions, to keep them from being overwhelming. Oh, and incidentally, it's important to remember that Emily Post's advice is from a particular perspective. It's from the dominant, white, Protestant, heterosexual perspective. And one thing that we all should be mindful of is that there are other ways of doing funerals and doing mourning. There are other societies. There are other social locations. Working as a chaplain in Louisiana, I was able to see how death impacted people from many different cultures, religions, and social locations. In seminary, we learned that there were 4 basic emotions: mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And everything was a variation on one of those, or some combination. When someone dies, the family sometimes turns up their emotional reactions, depending on a number of factors. They can get incredibly angry, mad at the deceased, mad at each other, mad at the hospital, mad at the airline schedules, just plain mad. And their grief turns into inconsolable anger. They can also become incredibly sad. And much to the hospital's credit, and I think the hospitals around here probably do the same, they now allow a family and close friends to stay with the body for some time. Some families allowed at the hospital where I was would stay out in the waiting room and then allow individuals to go in and each to say goodbye alone. Other families would ask that we all pray together, holding hands in a circle around the bed. It was very pretty, very wonderful, but also very sad. In one case, I remember there was a Korean businessman who died, and his son flew in from Korea. It took a couple of days. I took the son days later into the morgue so that he could provide a lengthy ritual of mourning grief over his father's body. And sometimes death evokes fear. How will we survive without him or her? The deceased could have been the source of income for the family, the source of protection from an abusive relationship, or maybe the family was just afraid of the unknown. Now, in addition to these 3 emotions, mad, sad, and afraid, death can also make a family glad. Emotionologists, and I don't think that actually is a word, but if there were such things, emotionologists would say that they would divide glad into three parts: peaceful, powerful, and joyous. At last he's at peace, a relative might say, and really mean it. Somebody may have been suffering for a long time, and at last he is at peace. Unitarian Universalist minister Kate Braystrup, who is the chaplain for the State of Maine's Game Warden Service and a wonderful author. I've got 3 of her books. She tells a story of a widow whose husband had drowned in the river, and the game wardens were in charge of recovering bodies from drownings. And so the story is that the widow is brought down, and she kneels over her husband and she sings one of the love songs from Porgy and Bess to her husband. Just a joyous moment. And sometimes the deceased was an abusive person, physically, emotionally, or verbally. And so death is actually a release to the family, or whoever it is who survives them. And sometimes there's no emotion shown at all. And that's okay. That's okay. Now, in Emily Post's day, most deaths occurred at home. By the 1960s, most white people's deaths were in hospitals or nursing homes. Nowadays, with hospice, and that's the topic of next week's sermon, the trend is back towards having more people die at home again. And whereas in Emily Post's day, funerals were fairly often done in the home, in the front parlor, that trend hasn't really gone back, but there's no reason that it couldn't. Also, these days, hospitals are much more compassionate. Where I worked, when a newborn dies, the parents are allowed to view or hold their child as long as they wish. And the nursing staff actually creates a memory book for the parents with photographs of the newborn, the toe prints, and other mementos. And one interesting thing that I learned was this is therapeutic for the nurses as well, especially when it was a very premature baby and they struggled for days or weeks to try to keep the baby alive. Now, my friend Lori Pausner, who's a licensed clinical social worker and the executive director of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Princeton, says that parents in New Jersey can even take the body home for up to 48 hours. So they can mourn there rather than in a hospital. That was indeed a little bit shocking to me. Usually Lori doesn't talk like this, but there she was telling me this stuff. She explained that in the USA we have a fear of dead bodies which a lot of the rest of the world doesn't have. Perhaps it's because we've seen one too many zombie movies. Or maybe it's actually associated with Halloween and the sort of being scared culture of Halloween. But think about it. This was someone that you loved, and your love is still there. Incidentally, Lori will actually be speaking in a couple of weeks in Medford, New Jersey on the 3rd of November at the Funeral Consumers Alliance of South Jersey, if you want to learn more about that. Well, I've already hit you with a lot of stuff. And there's a lot more to learn. As a caring community, I think it would be interesting. I think it would be useful. I think it would be a good thing if we had members of our congregation who knew the different funeral homes around the area, who knew the price ranges for a typical burial or cremation, and the etiquette of how to ask for that, and who knew the consumer rights. There's now a lot of federal laws and state laws which protect the bereaved. Also, it would probably be good to study religious rituals from different cultures associated with death. And that might actually be a way for us to interact with the wider community. I know that there are several different religious organizations around the area, which folks who view death in very different ways from the Emily Post Protestant way. I know it's scary stuff. Trust me, my first week as a chaplain, I was terrified. I didn't know the right thing to say. I didn't know the right thing to do. They looked to me, and all I had was a little handy Bible that they gave us to walk around with, which I didn't really know much about what was inside that. So one of the reasons that I've been pushing for us to have an evening get-together, small group reflections near the end of this month, is that this stuff brings up, this month's topic actually may be bringing up some things for you. And so we're asking folks to volunteer their living rooms for small gatherings, and I or one of the other people that we have to facilitate this will come and run a session with a number of neighbors so that nobody has to drive particularly far at night. And we can spend some time reflecting on things that might have happened during this, might have come up during this month. And I also encourage you all to talk to each other. Ask, what did you hear? Ask, what did you think? Ask, how did you feel? And if you get really good at it, you can say, was that mad, sad, glad, or afraid? That's what they taught us to do, always ask for the emotion. There's actually a sign-up list in the back corner. Welcome to say which of the evenings of the week of the 23rd, 24th, 25th you're able to come. And also please note which town you're in so that we can assign people to somebody close by. But the process of death really is a ritual, just like our service is a ritual, just like trick-or-treating is a ritual. It's a time, should be a time for you to reflect, should be a time for you to rearrange and find what makes sense to you and what it is you want to remember coming forward. Death's a normal part of life. How much of your fear of death, of someone else's death that is, comes from simply not knowing the custom, not knowing the process, or not knowing the etiquette? How much suffering can be relieved by learning, by becoming informed, or simply talking about it? And how can you help when a friend dies? And how can others help you? May peace be with you all. Amen.